Today's video is a bit of a vanity project in many respects, since today is a big day for me personally. I've been running the HITC 7's YouTube channel for a little over 2 years now, and as some of you who follow or subscribe to the channel may know, I've been writing a book for even longer than that. Today is the day that the book is published, and I get to add author to my LinkedIn bio. And since I suspect any of you enjoy the videos that I make on this channel, would also be likely to enjoy my book, today's video is all about the book and its subject itself, which is available from www.englandsgreatestdefender.com. The full title of the book is England's Greatest Defender, The Untold Story of Neil Franklin. And when I describe Neil Franklin as England's greatest defender, I'm not doing that thing publishers so often want their authors to do in coming up with a really eye-catching or controversial title. Virtually everyone who has ever witnessed Franklin in action considered him the greatest defender they had ever seen playing the game, including Gordon Banks, who picked Franklin at the heart of his defence in his Dream 11, even over his 1966 World Cup captain, Bobby Moore. Why have you probably never heard of him then? Well, there are a few reasons. Firstly, he played quite a long time ago. It holds true of football and just about anything that the further back you go, the less people are aware of. In 70 years' time, the talents of Paolo Maldini, Rio Ferdinand, and even Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi will have been largely forgotten about by a large number of people. There will, at least, be highlight reel after highlight reel, and indeed full 90-minute matches, available to people at the touch of a button to witness these greats even a century on. That is not the case with footballers who earned the same kind of reputation and adulation 70 years ago from now, when the televising of football matches was still in its infancy. That's one reason why you may not have heard of Neil Franklin. Then there's the fact that he played his best football for Stoke City, a fantastic football club with immense history, but not one of the world's most famous or celebrated teams, if we're being honest, meaning their greats of yesteryear, unlike Real Madrid or Manchester United's, aren't always global icons. Lastly, there's the fact that Neil Franklin's career at the highest level was cut incredibly short at both ends. Firstly, due to the Second World War, which began when Neil was only 17 and prevented the Football League from resuming until he was 24, and then there was the most fascinating feature of Neil's life, and the reason why I can't quite believe I'm the first person to have written a book about it, his 1950 move to the war-torn South American nation of Colombia. To understand Neil Franklin the footballer, he needs to be put in the context of his time. Franklin was an absolute anomaly of his day as a ball-playing centre-half who flat-out refused to kick or shove an opponent or to clear the ball long. He was a footballing purist who would have suited Pep Guardiola down to the ground, playing during an era of stoppers and brutes. This panicked managers who thought his confidence on the ball and willingness to waltz out from the back could be suicidal defensively. Many tried to make him change his approach, but Franklin wouldn't yield, and his footballing philosophy soon made him the finest centre-half in Europe and most probably the world. Between the end of the war in 1945 and England's last game of the 1949-50 British Home Championships, Neil Franklin played in every single England international, totalling some 27 caps, which was an all-time record at the time. That was just peacetime caps as well. Add in wartime appearances, and Neil Franklin had gone 39 games as England's undisputed anchor and pivot in the middle of the park. With the likes of Stanley Matthews, Tom Finney, Wilf Mannion, Frank Swift, Rach Carter, Stan Mortensen and Tommy Lawton at their disposal during the 1940s, England had assembled probably the greatest side they ever have and ever will. It speaks volumes then that among such esteemed peers, Neil Franklin was the one player it was simply unthinkable for England to name a starting 11 without. Just a couple of months before England made their FIFA World Cup bow at the 1950 finals in Brazil, however, they would be faced with a situation which required them to do just that. Franklin met with the FA selectors following a 1-0 win over Scotland to tell them they would be unavailable for selection for the World Cup since his wife was due to give birth around the time of the finals and he didn't want to be on the other side of the world when the baby was born. The FA were put in a state of panic, but could understand Neil's reasoning and had no option but to accept his decision and quickly try to identify a new centre-half. There was outrage then, less than a month later, when the news broke that Neil Franklin had boarded a flight said to be heading for the Colombian capital of Bogota. Initial suspicions that the trip may have been purely coaching related were soon ruled out, and suddenly Franklin was a bandit who had deserted his club and country in the views of the powers that be back home at least. Neil left Stoke City following a string of long-time disagreements with manager Bob McGrory and the club's refusal to allow him to join any other English club despite the offer of a world record transfer fee for the centre-half. It was under this cloud that Neil got an intriguing offer from a wealthy Cambridge-educated Colombian from Independiente Santa Fe. The Colombian League had gone rogue in South America, departing FIFA, meaning they were under no sanctions from football's governing body and poaching the best players from across the globe without paying any transfer fees. The Argentines in particular were outraged, and the likes of Nestor Real, Adolfo Pedernera and Alfredo Di Stefano soon found themselves playing in a country with virtually no footballing past. The reason for all this was rooted in Colombia's long tradition of political unrest and violence. In 1948, presidential candidate Jorge Alicia Gaitan had been gunned down in the streets of Bogotá, prompting 48-hour riots that became known as Bogotazo. Longer term, it would lead to 10 years of civil war in the country, including some of the bloodiest and most sadistic methods of violence in modern history, as over 200,000 people lost their lives. Although this violence had been largely restricted to the countryside by 1950, this was the Colombia that Neil Franklin arrived in when he left the humble potteries behind. Neil had no idea Colombia was in the midst of this brutal civil war, but he would soon find out. The hotel he was put up in still bore the scars of those Bogotazo riots. There were military checkpoints throughout the city, and a strict curfew, which left the streets dead by dusk. Most irritating of all to Neil Franklin, though, in classic British fashion, was the fact that the weather was nowhere near as good as advertised. Neil arrived in May, which is part of the rainy season in Bogotá, and he was far from impressed. Ultimately, Neil Franklin's Colombian adventure, which had seemed so appealing when viewed from Staffordshire, turned out to be a nightmare. His contract ought to have seen him earn more in a season than any Football League player could hope to earn in a decade, at a time when the maximum wage in England for a footballer was just £12 a week. It would be doubts about the nationality of his child that saw Franklin return to Britain after just 6 games for Santa Fe. Although promised to return, the club cancelled his contract, surrounding what they viewed as humiliation. When he returned to Britain, Franklin was still only 29 and he was still the best centre-half in Europe. The FA selectors had been humiliated themselves though, and an example had to be made of Neil. England had been humbled at the 1950 World Cup, going out in the first group stage and losing to the rank amateurs of the United States. Centre-half would be a problem position for the next 5 years, as England disappointed once again in Switzerland at the 1954 World Cup, having been thrashed twice by Hungary not long before. As a result, Neil Franklin was suspended for 4 months, ostracised by the FA selectors, and finally transfer listed by Stoke City. Oddly, the last of those 3 was something Neil had craved for some time, but not quite under these circumstances. He still had enough pedigree about him, even with this rather large blot beside his copybook, to become the most expensive defender the world had ever seen when he was signed by Hull City. Over the next 5 years, even when Neil felt like he was playing some of the best football of his career, the FA selectors wouldn't touch him. England cut off their nose to spite their face, and the finest defender the nation has ever produced was left to rue a 2-month spell in South America that left an indelible mark upon his career. This is a remarkably terse introduction into the life of Neil Franklin, not even touching upon his time during the war, the Burnham Park disaster, his role in some of England's finest victories, the time in which he was kidnapped, the El Dorado era of Colombian football, his playing days at club level, history-making early departure from Cyprus, where there was another civil war once Neil became a manager. I could go on. Neil Franklin's life is one of triumph, tragedy, genius, and naivety, but one thing he himself acknowledged is that no one could ever accuse it of having been dull. If you are a fan of this channel, or just like the sound of the story, do of course feel free to go to www.englandsgreatestdefender.com, which I've linked in the description, where you can learn a little bit more about the book and also order a copy, should you wish to do so. The book is also available as an ebook from Amazon, and if you want to order a hard copy from outside of the EU, it would probably be better to buy the book from Amazon or a local book retailer, since it will take a long time and cost a fair bit for me to get the book to you. Thank you all for watching. If you do buy the book, please send me a message and let me know what you think once you've got it and or read it. It has been a real labour of love, and I'm excited to see what people think. As always, thanks to you all for subscribing to the channel and watching my videos, and we're not far off that big 200,000 subscriber mark now, at which point I promised that I would do a big Q&A. Onwards and upwards, and I hope you all have a fantastic day.